In this video, we're going to create a direct lake model that's supported by Fabric Git integration, both with BIM and TMDL metadata formats. We'll first try to create a direct lake model from the Fabric portal. We'll call this direct lake Fabric. Select this single table to keep it simple. We're going to publish this in our workspace that has Git integration already configured. In the meantime, while it's creating that, we are going to go ahead and create our model in Tabular Editor. So we'll go File, New Model. We'll call this Direct Lake T3. We won't use a workspace database. We're going to import some tables from OneLake. We'll enter the endpoint, which I've already copied. Authenticate. And then select the table that we want to add, which was the product table, I believe. So we've imported the product table. It has direct lake next to it, so that's fine. So now let's deploy the model to the workspace. So we have the workspace selected. We'll authenticate for our deployment. And we'll call this direct lake T3. So we can see the direct lake fabric is already in there. And we'll deploy. The Tabular Editor is now deploying our model. And as soon as it's done, we'll take a look at the workspace, which has already our Fabric created direct lake model. So good. Okay, so we're looking at our direct lake model that was created for us in Fabric. We'll go to the workspace, we'll refresh. We can see that we have two models in here. So we have our model that we created, our direct lake model that we created in Fabric, and the one that we created in Tabular Editor. And the one that we created in Fabric currently does not support Git integration, whereas the one that we created in Tabular Editor does. So we will try to commit this and see what we see. So see what the result is. We'll open up source control, and we see that the unsupported item doesn't appear, so it's ignored. We're going to just call this init commit, so initial commit, and we'll see what the result is. Commit. Okay, so now we're using the Fabric Git integration to commit the changes. So for this specific model that we've added, we'll go in Visual Studio and we'll sync changes to pull that down to see what we see. So we see that we have our direct lake model, but we can see that we have the BIM file format. So we can see that it does appear as we expect. We have the metadata. We have the metadata in, for instance, but we are using the BIM format. The BIM format having this more difficult to read structure with the JSON nesting and the escape characters and things like this. So what we're going to try to do next is we're going to see if we can get it in TMDL. But first, we're going to confirm and validate that this direct lake model works. So we will go back to our workspace. We'll delete the one that's not supported. We will refresh the one we deployed with Tabular Editor to frame it, because it does not have any data immediately. So when you deploy a direct lake model with XMLA endpoint, you need to refresh it first, otherwise you get errors. And then we're going to try to create a report. And we will just add some random stuff. So, and we can see that we can indeed query this model and get results. So it seems to work perfectly fine. So we'll go back. And now we'll try to make some changes to it. So we'll close out of the model in Tabular Editor. And we're going to connect now to the model in the workspace. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to make some changes in Tabular Editor. For instance, adding a measure, like number of products, where we'll have count rows of values for product name, okay. And then we'll save those changes. And we'll see if we can pick up those changes in our source control. We see that indeed it does detect some changes here. So we'll say added number products measure, commit. Just to be sure, we will validate that that measure works. So we'll, by brand, we'll see the number of products. And we can see that that does indeed seem to work as expected. And if we go back to Visual Studio, we will just grab the latest changes here. And we can see if we do have our measure. So we are able to also pick it up. So the source control is working. So, but how do we get this with a BIM format? So we confirm that we can get the source control working with BIM, but how do we get it with TMDL rather? Well, if we want to do it with TMDL, we have to make a specific change. So what we're going to do is we're going to redeploy this model with one exception. We're going to add an annotation. So in that annotation is going to be a very specific annotation that tells the Power BI service to serialize the model in TMDL, to save it in TMDL. I've already have a macro that will do this for us. So I'll have a macro set model TMDL definition here, set model TMDL annotation. So this is the specific annotation that we need. So it's right here. So with the double underscore PBI service stored in TMDL, and it doesn't matter what value it is, it can be 1 or it can be anything else. But if this annotation is present, then we will get the TMDL format. Otherwise, we will get the BIM format. So let's test it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take and deploy this as a new model. And we're going to call this TE3 TMDL and see if it deploys as TMDL instead of BIM. So the moment it finishes deploying, we will then see whether we can commit those changes from the workspace in Fabric and then see TMDL instead of BIM. So we can see we have our new model that's been committed here, or been deployed rather. We're going to commit. So initial commit, direct lake TMDL, and we'll see if this works. So we'll commit it. Remember, the only difference is that we've added the annotation to our model object. So the commit is done. We synchronize those changes, close the model BIM, and we can see in here, and we can confirm that we indeed have the TMDL metadata. So we'll do the exact same steps. We'll connect to this model in Tabular Editor to validate that the source control works. What we'll do is we'll add another measure called number of brands, which is just a count row of the value brand name. Save. We will go back to the workspace, check. You can see indeed it picks up the change, but we'll do the refresh first because we're going to want to test that we can actually query this model to make sure it's functional. So make sure that we first do the refresh. So that's done. We will do our commit, update, added number of brands measure, commit. Those changes are committed. We are going to now validate that we can query this model, that it's a functional model. We can see our number of brands. Look at the number of brands by, I don't know, by a product business unit. And we can see indeed that we can query the model. So it's working as expected. So count row values for our brands. These rows are not supposed to add up in that table. So if we go then back to Visual Studio, remember we've committed that change, so we will synchronize to get it, and then check in our product. We have our measure here, number of brands, which we can see shows up. So what we've done to summarize is we have we can set up a direct lake model, if we create it in Tabular Editor, and then we deploy to a Fabric workspace that has Git integration already set up, then we can be able to either for the BIM or for TMDL, track and manage our changes using our Git integration and have those available in our remote and local repositories. So what's notable is in this case, then we're connecting Tabular Editor to the Fabric workspace, and then we're making the commits within the Fabric workspace, just in this demonstration. And again, to reiterate, for TMDL, you need that annotation. And the annotation is, to go back, the annotation is right here, is this _PBI service stored in TMDL. Right here, and it doesn't matter what value it is, but it needs to be something. And this is something that's just temporary while it's in preview, because eventually TMDL will be the default, of course. And in a nutshell, that is how you set up Git integration with a direct lake model, either for the BIM format or the TMDL format.